Good afternoon. My name is Michael Roberts. I'm CEO and founder of Warrior to Citizen, the host for this program. We are a 10-year-old nonprofit that provides psychoeducation, counseling, coaching, and training to veteran and first responder families. Warrior to Citizen, by the way, is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Thanks for joining us today exploring the many complex aspects of military and first responder families, their challenges and opportunities to grow closer as a family and simultaneously manage a stress-filled career. Our previous webinars can be reviewed on our website or Facebook sites. Each of the subjects covered in the Warrior to Citizen webinars provides a window into lessons learned from mental health professionals and chaplains who specialize in the unique character of the veteran and first responder family. This Warrior Citizen webinar series sets out to help to strengthen families to better deal with the COVID-19 crisis and its after effects. During this unprecedented time, families of service members and first responders face extreme challenges. We believe today's subject matter experts will offer a dialogue that opens communication, deepens family relationships, fosters healing, and encourages resiliency. Change does start at home. Our desire and mission is to support families and to strengthen bonds. If our webinars are of interest, please share them with others. Please also let us know if you have any questions in the future. Contact us at info@warrior2citizen.org. Be sure to use the numeral 2. Please note that our website and Facebook site describes our program offerings and information about our coming and past events. So without further delay, I'm proud to introduce today the moderator for this program. General Douglas Carver is a very good friend, former Chief of the Army Chaplains, and served our nation for over 30 years in uniform. Presently, he is the director at the North American Mission Board, leading over 3,000 chaplains. General Carver is also on the Warrior Citizen Board of Directors, and he will introduce our subject matter experts on staff. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Mike, so much for that introduction. It's really an honor to be a part of this fifth and our final series of webinars entitled Strengthen Our Military Veterans, First Responders, and Their Families During the COVID-19 Pandemic. I'd like to also thank all of you for attending today's event. You could be a lot of different places, but thank you for spending this next hour with us. I know that you're going to find it very fruitful and very helpful in your particular paths of life. These webinars have been so timely as our nation has been gripped with so many challenges. A virus pandemic and economic meltdown that's changed the lives of small businesses and families. A suicide epidemic among our veterans where 22 veterans a day are taking their lives. And the current social unrest and racial tension in our city streets that we have really not experienced in the last 50 years. And at the same time, we continue to have over 200,000 troops deployed in some 170 nations, many of them even today, standing in harm's way. In many respects, these webinars have provided a clear sense of direction, a personal education, and invaluable counsel for our lives during these chaotic times. And we've been fortunate to have a number of subject matter experts to lead these seminars on critical topics that are affecting us, including how to strengthen family ties during a time of crisis and chaos, finding peace and calm in the storms of life, ensuring that you have an understanding on the importance of conflict resolution so that we can join hands with others who might disagree with us and lead it onto mediated and common ground. Our last webinar, we focused on brokenness and how we can repair the brokenness that so many of it have experienced. And today's webinar is on the topic of hope for tomorrow. Our panelists come from various subject matter expertise backgrounds, coming from Warrior to Citizen board members, Mercer University, public safety, military veterans, chaplains, pastors, healthcare communities, and you will find that today's panelists are exceptional in their wealth of knowledge on the topic of hope. Dr. David Lane is professor of counseling in Penfield College of Mercer University and he's the founder of the counseling program and PhD program at Mercer in Atlanta. He has over 40 years of experience as a counselor, educator, and a supervisor. He's a licensed professional counselor, a licensed marriage and family therapist, a nationally board certified counselor, a certified professional counselor, supervisor, and a clinical member of the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. He's published in numerous articles, book chapters, and manuscript reviews in the field of counseling and marriage and family therapy. Dr. Lane, it's so good to have you with us today. Dr. Lou Kuhn is an author, he's a speaker, he's an intervention advocate and a United States Army Reserve chaplain. He serves as the Special Projects Liaison for Behavioral Health Link and the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. And he's the founder of Armed Forces Mission and the Intervene Challenge. Dr. Kuhn has conducted more than 1,200 suicide interventions, and he's trained over 17,000 individuals within Department of Defense, our various law enforcement agencies, churches, and civic organizations. Lou, we're glad to have you with us today. Russ Brown is a chaplain in the Army National Guard, a high school teacher in the state of Pennsylvania. He has nearly 30 years of experience as a pastor and military chaplain. He and his wife, Amy, have been married for 36 years. They have 3 children and 12 grandchildren. Russ, welcome. Thank you for being with us today. And finally, we have Justin Wells, who's a captain in the Pennsylvania National Guard, Army National Guard. He served as a counselor and a program director with Warrior to Citizen for many, many years. He's also a social worker and marriage and family therapist with a successful practice in New Jersey, just outside of New York City. Justin, welcome. Let me begin, panelists, by offering you a historical nugget for you to kind of consider for a moment as we look to the opportunity for each of you to define the concept of hope. On December the 1st, 1862, a month before signing the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln gave his second annual address to Congress with some stirring words that have remained etched forever in our nation's history. He said, "The Civil War was a defining moment for our history. It was a battle for the soul of America." And he challenged Congress to save the Union, to save the United States of America by agreeing to end slavery. And he said quite simply in closing, "We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of the earth." So in some respects, some would say that hope comes from a purely national or political decision. Or is hope something different? Is it transcendental? Some have referred hope as a human instinct, that we all have this desire to survive. And you've heard the saying, where there's life, there's hope. The 17th century poet Alexander Pope, in his essay, An Essay of Man, says, "Hope springs eternal." And in his view, perhaps hope is nothing more than just an optimistic view of life. In 1991, Dr. Charles Snyder at the University of Kansas did a test with about 3,000 college students and developed what is referred to as the hope scale. And he said hope is nothing more than a cognitive reality. In other words, you desire a goal in life and you look for ways to accomplish that goal. Hopelessness is at the top of the list of cognitive patterns that underlie depression. A depressed person, some say, only sees a future of pain. Time journalist and author Dr. David Aikman, in his book, Hope, says that particular quality, hope, is our greatest quest for our life. And finally, from a spiritual plane, Psalm 42, the psalmist says, "Why am I downcast? Why am I depressed? O my soul, I'm going to put my trust in God." The book of Romans, chapter 4, verse 18 says, "Against all hope, Abraham believed." In the book of Ephesians, the Apostle Paul says that we are not in this world as believers in Christ without hope and without God. And finally, the prophet Isaiah prophesied that there would come a Messiah. We Christians believe that it's Jesus Christ in Matthew 12, verse 21, where the scripture says, "In his name, the nations put their hope." So I've thrown a lot out there for you to kind of consider and to define hope from a variety of contexts. So, Dr. Lane, I'm going to begin with you and let you take your shot with us and define hope from your particular perspective, please.
Well, thanks so much for the introduction, Doug, and thank you for kind of laying the base for the first item that we want to talk about. I'm really flattered to be here with this group of distinguished professionals, and I appreciate the opportunity that Warrior Citizen has provided for me. So, I wanted to say that up front. When I think about hope in this particular situation, I think about two things. Hope to me comes from my surety of faith, that I know that there is a plan for me. I know that I'm living life as I'm called to live it. That does not mean it's going to be pain-free, however. There's no guarantee. I've read the book Stem to Stern, and there's nowhere in there does it say, oh, everything's going to be cool and you're not going to struggle a bit. It doesn't say that anywhere. In fact, it says quite the opposite, that there's going to be a lot of difficult times, and you'll know trouble, you'll know stress, you'll know strife. That's everywhere. But I also read the end of the book. I know how it turns out, and we win. So that to me is the inspiration and the basis of hope, that I have absolute faith and surety in that fact that we win, and it's going to turn out for good. But in this season that we're in, I take hope from the fact that it is just a season. I've read a good bit over the last 2 or 3 months about the pandemic of 1918, Spanish flu, and it actually went on about 2 years. And we're kind of repeating that now, where folks got really sick. It kind of swept across the world. Folks got really sick. Then they did a bit of what we did, sheltered in place, closed down businesses and schools, et cetera. Then it waned. Then they started reopening businesses, et cetera. Then it came back. And they modified, and people began to wear masks in public and those kind of things. But even then, they were having anti-mask rallies and what they call freedom gatherings, where people were kind of struggling against the mandate that they wear masks in public. So it came back for a while, waned again, came back in the spring of 1920, and then finally went away. But it was just a season, and I absolutely have faith that this is just a season for us. A third thing that jumps to mind, is by the time you reach a certain age, you've experienced some difficulty in your life. And one of the best examples of that I've ever read was a guy named Sid Phillips, and some of you may have heard of him. He was a Marine in the 1st Marine Division, served on Guadalcanal in 1942. And the Japanese Navy pushed our Navy back, and so the Marines were kind of stranded on the island, and they sat offshore and shelled them for 18 days, 18 straight days. All these guys did was lay in a hole and hope not to take a direct hit. And Sid Phillips said an important thing that he learned from that was, regardless of what happened in the rest of his life, he could clearly and honestly say, I've been through worse. And so everything that came along, he just applied that aphorism to everything that came along down the road in his life. The truth is, by the time you reach a certain age, you've been through some tough times and you come up on another tough time, you can honestly say, I've been through worse. And that then, to me, instills hope for me, because, like you guys, I've had some tough times in my life, but the truth is, anything that comes down the pipe, I've been through worse. And I know that it is just a season, and my faith tells me that everything's going to be all right in the end. And so that to me is what hope is about. So.
Thanks, Dave. That's a great response. Lou, I'm going to go to you next. Obviously, as in part of your life, you're also a military chaplain, and so you deal with a lot of worldviews of those within the context of the armed services. Some who hope in Jesus Christ, some who hope in other religious expressions or things. So again, a good definition of hope for us, because and then my question to you specifically, can you have hope without actually thinking about it spiritually? So.
When I think of hope, kind of to borrow from what Dr. Lane was saying, the surety, I think of expectation. It's more than just a desire. I can desire, I can say, I hope I get pizza when I go home tonight, and my wife's, well, I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But if she calls me and tells me, hey, we're having pizza tonight, then I know we're going to be eating pizza. So it's more than desire. It's more than a probability. It's more than a statistical um, uh, possibility and a probability. It is a certainty. It's an expectation that we know something is going to happen. And it's so powerful in what I do every day in my work with veterans, with law enforcement, whatever the case may be. If they don't have hope, you mentioned several verses of scripture, and the one that comes to mind for me is that idea that without hope or without vision, we perish. I think that hope and vision are parallel ideas there. They go together. We can't have hope if we don't have vision for tomorrow. So many of the folks that I've worked with who were having those thoughts of suicide, they didn't have a vision for tomorrow. They thought that their life was over. They thought that their family members would be better off without them. They thought that they had no purpose. And so when we have hope, we've got purpose, we've got vision, we've got a reason to live, we've got certainty about some certainties about tomorrow. Hey, it may not be good tomorrow, but if I don't stick around for it, I won't ever know. And so I've got to stick around long enough to understand that, hey, I can get through this. And I also think of another good word in the scripture. It says we press on. We press on. So that doesn't necessarily, you mentioned how can we look at this from maybe a non-spiritual component. We don't have to have a spiritual background to press on. You can, I think about when the Braves won the pennant and Sid Bream was on second base, and he was the slowest man on the team. He'd had knee surgery, but he knew that he had to press on. He knew when that ball hit out over the shortstop, if he didn't get home, they were going to lose. And he had great hope, and that's what caused him to press on. He didn't have to be a spiritual person to slide into home plate and win the pennant. And that's my idea of hope. And as we keep pressing on, even when we think we can't keep going, and even when our knees are shot and our mind is weary, we continue to push forward. If we're not pushing forward, regardless of what's going on in our lives, then we're losing hope. And without hope, we perish.
Thanks, Lou. And Justin, I'm going to come to you next, and especially since you do a lot of a counseling and an individual, as you define hope for us, any red flags or concerns when you hear, let's say, a couple, a spouse basically says, well, I hope this marriage works. I mean, as a counselor, where do you go with that when you hear that? If you could address that within the context of answering or defining what hope is as well, please.
Well, to follow in everyone else's footsteps, I'll quote scripture again. Faith without works is nothing. And that's what that reminds me of. I can hope for a lot of things, but if I do not put action into that hope, then what will I have? I was thinking about all the people that I see, people that have dealt with death, loss, physical trauma, emotional trauma, police, military. Every one of those categories we've been able to see get to a much better place, get from a place of lack of hope to a place of hope, a place where they can actually see the differences. And the only difference between those people and the people that live in a place without hope is that the people that come in are saying, I feel like there is no hope, but I know that's not right. I know that's not the way it's supposed to be. So let me do something, let me learn, let me talk, let me wrestle with this, because something inside of me says we're not made to live a life that is depressed, made to live a life that feels like there is no tomorrow. And so once you realize, hey, we're not made to be this way, this is not what we're designed for, then now the issue lies in what do I need to learn that I haven't learned already? What do I need to shift? What do I need to tweak? So that now I can go and live a life that is full and abundant. Because the honest truth is we are not made to live fearful and timid lives. We're also not made to be loud and boisterous and boastful, but we're made to be humble. We're made to be loving and kind. And if we're not in that place, then it's possible to get there if we merely are willing and courageous enough to say, I want that and I need help because my way hasn't gotten me there already.
Well, that's great. I've just got a lot of thoughts on what you just said regarding, hope being, you're willing to learn something in the midst of trying to find hope. The other thing is, I was listening to your response, there seems to be an element of trust, which is the very definition of hope as well. I remember one definition, hope is help that comes to me in my time of need. So there's also a desire to need, that you have a great need, there's a chaos, there's an unsolved problem, and you're looking for a course of action to help you survive or to succeed. It's looking for that help in times of need. Russ, why don't you give us a shot as far as your understanding and definition of hope, please?
Well, again, picking up on what everyone else has said, I've kind of got a little mantra that I remind myself. It's hey, God's on his throne and my wife still loves me. And if I've got those two things, I can handle a whole lot in life. What more do I need? So for me, it's thinking through and remembering what's important. What are your priorities? What's your focus? What are you choosing to see? If you're looking for the negative, you can find the negative, and it's hard to find hope. But if you're looking for the positive, you can find the positive. I've been a pastor and a chaplain for a lot of years, and I've never had a couple come into my office for premarital counseling or talking about wanting to get married and saying that they want to get married for a few years. Everybody comes in with the idea that this is true love and it's going to last forever and it's going to be marital bliss every day. And then sometimes life doesn't turn out that way. Sometimes there's a difference between the reality and the fairy tale we create in our minds. And so it's getting our eyes back on what's the reason we got married? What's the reason we were together? What's the reason that I loved her or I love him? And it's also remembering there's no shame in seeking help. My wife and I, we spent several months, close to 2 years in couples therapy. That was almost 30 years ago. At the time, I didn't want to be married. I didn't want to stay with her. But my parents raised me that I was supposed to be a man of integrity. When I say I do, and till death do us part. And that commitment was just enough to get me through and get my focus back off of where it shouldn't be and back onto where it should be. We've been married 36 years now, and she's still my best friend. We learned the skills, like Justin was talking about, to succeed in marriage. So hope, I think a lot of it is what you're choosing to look at. And like Justin said, what you're choosing to work for and what you're choosing to do.
Well, let me ask the panel this question. Someone who just called me and says they have a incurable brain tumor, said that they've had a lot of comfort out of reading Elizabeth Elliot's book, her new book that's just out. Suffering actually means everything. So can you kind of talk about, again, just the seasons of life in which we suffer maybe a bad marriage, a rebellious child, an incurable disease, but somehow even through suffering and these great challenges that you actually, one of the end states is that you actually become more hopeful through your suffering or the challenge. So would one of you like to pick that up and run with it a little bit?
Okay.
Lou, we'll start with you.
I'll run with it if Lou didn't chime in quick enough.
Okay.
I look at the saying, pain is weakness leaving the body. And that can very well be true for the emotional as well. We go through difficult things in large part because we need to grow in areas that we don't realize we needed to grow in. We were actually stuck and stagnant, but didn't realize it. And so that discomfort, that disease, that pain that we go through is actually us, our bodies, are God telling us, hey, there was something going on that wasn't right, and now it needs to come out of you. And so pain and discomfort to me are not something to be avoided. Basic training stunk. It was miserable, a lot of the physical activity, but in hindsight, loved it. And I think so much of it is, counseling, therapy, workshops, the personal work you do. Maybe some of the moments aren't always fun, But when you look at it in hindsight, you're like, that's the best stuff of my life. That made me better. I am now stronger emotionally, physically, mentally, because I did those things.
Thank you, Justin. Lou, we'll come back to you.
I have often shared my story of how I got to where I'm at today. And had I had the opportunity to choose 15 years ago where I was going to be and the road that I was going to go down to get to where I'm at, I would not be here today, because it was a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, a lot of trial and tribulation. And but that's what it took for me to get to where I'm at today, working with people, and my heart of empathy today compared to where it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I used to, the old adage in the military is just suck it up, buttercup, and keep going. And I have more empathy today because I've been through trials and pain myself. And the individual that had reached out to you who's got an inoperable brain tumor, I think about when I was in seminary 30 years ago, and my father or my mother called and said, you need to get home. Your dad's dying. And those 2 weeks that I had with him before he died were some of the sweetest. I have just some of the sweetest, most incredible memories of the conversations that we had, and how our relationship, it was not weakened by the announcement, it was strengthened by the announcement. And just a sweet, sweet, precious time. And then even the day he died, 6 o'clock in the morning, the day after Easter, and our entire family was standing beside his bed, and we sang songs as he passed from this life into eternity. Incredible, incredible. And if I had not wanted to go through those, or if I had avoided those painful things, I would never have experienced it. If I had said, Mom, I can't come home, I've got to do classes, I've got to graduate. But no, that I had to go home to experience that pain that my father was going through. And it was actually the most incredible time in my 57 years of life.
Thank you, Lou, for sharing that personal story. Dr. Lane?
I think of it as suffering has the potential to give us great strength. There's a verse in the Bible that I can't quote exactly, but where perseverance builds character. It's one of Paul's letters, and I have leaned on that many, many times, and I know that through the struggle, I have grown in strength. It's something that's always been a tremendous comfort to me, and I wish that everybody kind of thought of it this way, that during times of struggle is when the Lord is closest to me. I have leaned on him many, many times, and during my struggles, and I've grown in a deeper understanding. It's well with my soul, and that's what he's here to teach me. He is here to help me understand. My flesh is going to fail. The world is corrupt. The flesh fails, but he is here for my soul, and he does guard that, and he does take care of that, and he does minister to that, and he does keep it whole. And that to me is just the absolute definition of hope. To bring it full circle, is living in the full and certain knowledge that it is well with my soul, and I am whole and complete, and I can be, if I choose, to be in the kingdom now, and not have the difficulties that the flesh is going to seek to corrupt me with. But if I keep my eyes where they need to be, I'm filled with hope, knowing that I am complete. And I wish if I could give that to, if there's one thing in the world that I could give to everybody that I have contact with, that would be the thing. You're struggling with the flesh, but let me tell you, your soul is complete if you'll just turn and face in that direction. So That's my immediate thought on that topic. And then Lou really reinforced what I was thinking when he talked about the suffering with his dad and watching his dad experience what he did, and it turned out to be joyful. And it was a joyful parting, but it was because I think Lou knew that it was well. His dad was completely healed, and his dad was completely free of all of that. And if he was willing to stand there, he could be part of that joy and miracle, and instill the hope and reinforce the hope that things like that bring. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Or like the Apostle Paul, you know, we want to line up for the power of the resurrection, as he says in one of his letters, but who wants to line up for the fellowship of suffering? That's a very small line. No one's shoving to get there.
That's right. And all of those guys, I'm sorry to interrupt, but all of those guys, you know, physically it turned out poorly for them. It did not go well. John is the only one, but he, you know, was in exile, but he was the only one that was not physically tortured and executed. And yeah, you're exactly right. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Russ, if we can kind of, again, follow this whole train of thought about, you know, suffering and hope and what all that means. I remember reading a book years ago when I first went into seminary, Don't Waste Your Sorrows. So maybe if you could, again, speak to that, not just our physical maladies, but I mean, there are sufferings that we all face in our seasons of life. So you could kind of put the corollary there, please.
What comes to my mind is the idea that it's not really what happens to us in life, it's how we handle what happens to us in life. I think of my friend Daryl, who died of skin cancer, and I prayed with him, and we talked a lot, and I asked him, I said, aren't you mad? And how can you go through this? Because he always had a great spirit, and people were inspired. And he said, you know what, Russ? Getting cancer was the best thing in my life. Now, that would not be high on my list. And so, of course, I asked him, Daryl, what do you mean? And he said, before I was diagnosed with cancer, I was just kind of going through the motions, living life, go to work, go home, watch TV, go to bed, get up the next morning, do the same thing, just going through the motions. He said, getting cancer forced me to evaluate what's really important. What do I hold dear? Where am I going? What's the future hold? What about my children? And he said it made him a much better person and a better Christian. And so bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. Stuff happens. It's not really what happens. It's how do you handle what happens? How do you see what happens?
Thanks, Russ. Let me, Dr. Lane, I'm going to bring this one to you first. There's a book by Dr. Harold Koenig. He's done some great research on hope and healing, especially among geriatric patients over at Duke University. And he has a book called Hope and Healing for Those with PTSD, where he focuses primarily on individuals, our troops, as well as those who have suffered severe trauma. He said severe trauma or moral injury can actually lead to hopelessness and depression and suicide. And so the question would be, how can we help restore hope to those who've lost it due to some, great tragedy in their lives? Because we're all going to be faced with that as we counsel others, and even within the Home Life Transition Program, we have some marriages that come to us, and I mean, they're toast as far as it appears. They've lost hope that they can recover from an affair, or recover from a broken trust or a betrayal. So could you speak to that one, please?
Sure, I'm happy to, but I'm also interested in hearing what Lou and Russ have to say, because they've got this great background in working with suicidal clients and interventions, et cetera. But with folks with PTSD, in some respects, they have lost hope and they feel broken. And in some cases, they feel irreparable. They can't be repaired. And it's not true, because many people have very, very difficult times. Everybody in life has some, little t trauma, if not huge, big T trauma. And so nobody gets out of here unscathed. And so the hope can come from a number of things when you're working with PTSD clients. One thing is that one of the reasons that they feel fragmented is because biologically, that's how our memory of trauma is stored in our brain. Memories are usually tied to emotion. We don't remember the mundane things that we do day to day, but when something comes along that stirs our emotion, we do remember that. And so these highly emotional, traumatizing experiences are stored in a fragmented memory. They don't have a beginning, they don't have a middle, they don't have an end. Those of us who have had difficulty in our lives, one of the things that is helpful to do is tell and retell the story. One of the treatments that the VA has approved for veterans is called prolonged exposure therapy. And one of the things that they do in prolonged exposure therapy is they tell their story and they retell the story, and they wind up focusing on putting the story together. What were the precursors to this? What was it like before the traumatic event? Then what was the traumatic event? Then what's it like since the traumatic event? And then the final piece of it is, how do I decide to move forward and get back in charge of my life, rather than having this thing define my life and deal with affect the way that I deal with life from here forward. So the first thing that's important to do with people who are struggling with PTSD and moral injury is come alongside them, be there for, help them understand that you are not alone, because everybody feels absolutely alone. And so you build that alliance, you build rapport, so that they feel like they can begin to open up with you. You had trauma X. I didn't have that same traumatic experience that you had, but I still understand what it feels to be hopeless. I still understand what it feels to be broken. I still understand, and we can share that and then begin to put the pieces back together. So there definitely is hope. I'm really anxious to hear what Lou and Russ says, so I'll be quiet and turn it over to them, because I got the incredible in working with people who have lost all hope.
Thanks, David. Russ, let's go to you next, please. If you could address this particular issue that we're talking about.
There's no real single answer. People, the different individuals I have spent time with bring their individual problems. So I like to listen. Like Dave was saying, let them tell their story. Let them walk through their story, and allow them to tell me what the problem is and what the heartache is. And when you're talking moral injury, a moral injury is where you have violated your own moral code, what you've been taught is right and what is important and significant, either through your experiences or things that you've witnessed. And some people can go through the exact same experiences and not experience the same trauma. So allowing the individual to slowly bring it out and to begin to deal with it. One of the things that, again, that is so significant is that people understand that getting help is not a sign of weakness. We know that in every other aspect of our life. If I break my arm, I'm going to go see a physician to get my arm fixed. And so to find help as I process my experiences and come to grips with my experiences is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. So I encourage that and help the individual find the focus of where he stands or where she stands in dealing with these experiences. And then we go individually depending on where that path takes us.
Thanks, Russ. Lou, you've talked to so many folks who have expressed, suicidal ideation, or they come to you for intervention and they have no hope. So again, could you speak to those struggling with post-traumatic stress, some severe trauma, moral injury, and how to cover that?
Certainly. I greatly appreciate what Dr. Lane shared about the power of the story, because when I first came back in to the military 10 years ago, it was under less than honorable conditions. I was hoping to be deployed so that the enemy would kill me. I mean, that was really my goal. And over time, my son came into my life and helped me to see the light again, that there was hope in my life that I didn't realize was still there. And so I began to share my story. At first, I was afraid that I would get kicked out of the military because the story was something that, why would they let me into the military in the first place with suicidal ideation? But over time, the word got out, and I kind of became the poster boy. Went all over the country. Was up at Crystal City, up in Washington. You've probably been there, and Sergeant Major's Academy, and just got back last week from training the 169th Fighter Wing at the Air Force Base just south of Fort Jackson at McEntire. And as I shared my story, the interesting thing is other people came out of the audience. I was trying to get to the airport in Washington, D.C. after sharing a story there, and a full bird colonel came up to me. He said, "I need to talk to you." And I gave him my number, and we were able to communicate over a period of several weeks. But he was so appreciative that I was willing to share my story because he didn't think he could share his. And he was struggling with those thoughts of suicide. And so, it's not that goodness knows, I look at our panel here, none of us here are perfect. We're all broken people, but we've learned how to work through that brokenness, and that bone is actually stronger now. And because of that, other people can have hope, and we've got to come alongside of them. Not to share our story, not to say that I've been there too, but because we have been in many cases in that place, we can have empathy, and we can listen non-judgmentally, and we can just have ears. We don't have to have a mouth many times. We mouth off enough. We need to have ears so that we can hear their story. And as we hear their story, they begin to find nuggets of hope in their own life. That's why I shared my story all the time, because, and at first I had to share it to convince myself that I had a reason to live. And now it's not that, it's a platform for me to be able to help other people. And that's what we're supposed to do, is help. Once we've been healed of our brokenness, we turn around, we walk with those who are also broken, and it's a journey that we take together.
Thanks, Lou. And really what you're talking about, as we extend empathy to others, we're actually removing perhaps the stigma that others may be afraid of even talking about their trauma. So Justin, again, if we could come to you to be a part of this discussion.
When we talk about post-traumatic stress or moral injury, the after effect of that is often this feeling of hopelessness. What I want to continue to bring us back to is this idea that before that event or those events, hope was a part of your story. So what we need to do is not run away. What too many people do is they see that trauma and they go, "I don't want to deal with that. Justin, that's scary, that hurts, that brings up pain." But if we go back and we actually deal with the thing that caused the pain, then now all of a sudden we can bring back the hope. It was there before. We removed the roadblock, we removed the barrier, we provide a different way of looking at it, of dealing with it, and all of a sudden the hope can return. Just because we don't have hope now doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. It typically can mean that we learned something at some point in time that got us to this place where we believe there's no hope. If we can change that lesson, if we can reframe it, it can make a world of difference.
Well, gentlemen, this has been wonderful. We've got a few more minutes left, and here's how I would like to conclude this panel. We do have questions coming in, but we're wired to have hope. It's almost an instinct. I think we talked about that earlier. But something happens, especially right now in the season in which we're living, with all of the bad news clips that are played over and over, and all of the statistics about COVID and that it's rising. We can become tainted in our outlook, not only about COVID, but about life in general, and looking at things negatively. So with the context of hope in mind, what I would like to do with each one of you, with all of the great resources that Warrior to Citizen provides through our webinars and our home life transition program, could you share with me what you know within the context of your disciplinary field? What is it that we can provide that can help those veterans, their family members, first responders, married couples who come and are part of our additional training and resources that we provide, that healing, hope, and help to those individuals who reach out to us? So If you could just perhaps share your best practice, this has worked for you. And so, Russ, we'll start with you.
Well, the home life transition weekends are very powerful events. We've seen so many couples come through those things and come out the other side with hope. They come in many cases, they're convinced that they're just doing the weekend to check the box so that the spouse will get off their back. And they come away saying, you know what, I think that this can work. So it's often reframing, reformulating, and helping them see again what got them together in the first place. I've said many times, I don't think we're going to teach you anything new, but it sure is good to have a reminder of how to go forward from here.
Thanks, Russ. Lou?
I appreciate all that Warrior to Citizen is doing, and particularly now we're working together in the suicide intervention piece. And wherever I go when I'm teaching, whether it's airmen or soldiers or church leaders or whatever the case may be, I get everybody to share together. Intervention saves lives, and we all say it loud and clear. Intervention saves lives. Sometimes we'll say it 2 or 3 times to get it in our head. Intervention saves lives. And the reason I say that is because when I am working with someone who is suicidal, I have great hope. I have great hope. And it's not some statistical thing. It is a certain thing. It is a certain thing that if I can get in front of them, listen to them, walk with them in the journey, then we are going to instill hope. And that hope, even if it's a grain of a mustard seed, we know how that one goes, right? Just a little bit of hope will save the day. And if we can save the day, and if they can get a good night's sleep tonight, they're going to wake up tomorrow. I've had soldiers over and over after they've had a good night's sleep. They come back to me the next day and say, Chaplain, I don't even know why I was thinking that yesterday. I've got some hope today. And that to me is so powerful. So hope today is going to increase hope tomorrow, and it just multiplies. And so that's why I'm so excited to be part of what Warrior to Citizen is doing. We're multiplying the hope.
Thanks. And in some respects, once we can get that couple, that individual, that family to some of these events, it actually becomes a place, a refuge where hope can take place, connecting with others and either actually coming there as an individual or referring those that are within your sphere of influence to this place where they might actually have their hope filled back up or rediscovered. Justin, could you speak to this as well? What have you discovered that really has been used to just turn the light on regarding hope for those that you serve?
So a lack of hope, basically, when people come in, a lot of them have this idea of, this is how the world is. This is my reality. My job is horrible. My spouse hates me. The public that I work with, they don't like me. We have all of these things that we're just locked in. We have no other answer. We're like that horse with the blinders on. We have no other option available to us. And so I think of that, and I think of the TV shows. They might still be on today, but I think of the older ones where someone's just being hysterical. They're just going off. And what does the other person do? They give them a slap across the face, and it kind of sobers them up and gives them a jostle, and they start to go, okay, whoa, I was thinking a little crazy. Now, we don't go and slap people in the face. That has not been proven to be an effective intervention. However, emotionally, with knowledge, we give them things that all of a sudden open up little spots in those blinders that they had been oblivious to. And it starts to give me a different way of viewing the situation that I've only viewed as one way before in the past. And now that I have different ways, different options of interpreting things, all of a sudden there's hope. One of the fun stories was of a gentleman who actually left one of our retreat weekends. He was like, I'm out, been fun, I can't handle this. And he just starts walking. He was able to be re-engaged. And that him walking was just his way of saying, I don't know how to deal. My way of thinking and processing things doesn't work. and what you're saying doesn't fit. But then we were able to bring him in and help explain it to him. And all of a sudden, this man who was leaving the retreat halfway through wanted to stay the rest of the time. It's kind of like what Lou was saying. If you just get through that moment, then all of a sudden things are much better. So we give people that hypothetical slap in the face to kind of get some sense knocked into them so they can start to think clearly again and are not acting off of fear. Basically, we're trying to get people to not act off of fear anymore.
Right. I have so many visuals from what you just shared. I hope in many respects it's an anchor. When life is kind of throwing you for loops, if you can get just that glimmer of hope, it can anchor you and hold you afloat until you can get your bearings and refocus. So I appreciate you sharing that, Justin. Dr. Lane, again, what have you found that has just been one of those great resources, lessons learned that this works as you extend or work with others to counsel them towards the land of hope?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of working on what the right problem. Find out what the right problem is. That starts with assessment. And one of the things that Warrior to Citizen does on the Home Life Transition Weekend is they assess the people when they first come in to try and determine what the issues are. And couples come to me all the time, and they sit across from me and I say, well, tell me what's going on. That's how I usually start things, some semblance of that. And they say, well, we struggle with each other all the time. Well, what do you usually fight about? Well, we have lots of fights over money. Well, that's not the problem, but that tells me something, because struggles over money are about power. They're about control. And who struggles for power and who struggles for control? People who feel powerless struggle for power and struggle for control. And so if I can then focus on the powerlessness, we're working on the right problem. And the same thing is, it's a common denominator across the families and the couples and families that Warrior to Citizen sees. Guys come back from deployment. Well, to some extent, emotionally or in their brain, they are still in Afghanistan. They're still in Iraq. They're still, where they left from 2 weeks or 30 days or even 6 months or a year ago sometimes. And they are still there. And they feel powerless over that set of emotions. And then their spouse is trying to get them to engage, and he or she is complaining, well, I can't get them to engage with me. They're just distant. It's like they're disconnected. Well, both then are feeling powerless. The veteran is feeling powerless over where his brain keeps going and his emotions keep going, or her brain keeps going and her emotions. And the spouse is feeling powerless because he or she is desperately trying to get them to engage and reconnect. And so Warrior to Citizen in the Home Life Transition Program, and when you're doing counseling, they work on the right problem. They work on helping people regain the power and the sense of sovereignty over their own life. I have authority over my life. I can make choices about my life. I'm the one in charge of how I think and how I feel, and therefore how I act. And that's a big element of counseling. It's a big element of what Warrior Citizen helps families do that. And when you're working on the right problem, you start feeling some relief almost immediately, and that relief tends to be a wellspring of hope when people start feeling relieved of it and begin to feel a little bit empowered in their lives again. So I'm a proponent of working on the right problem.
Thank you, Dr. Lane. Hey, with our time remaining, if something, any of the panelists can answer this, but if there's some simple practice or some discipline that those who are watching today could begin immediately before they come to a Warrior to Transition event, or before they schedule an appointment with a therapist or a counselor, can you recommend something that would work right now to at least start that journey for hope towards tomorrow? Any of you like to respond to that, please?
I'm going to chime in again. One of the things I regularly ask everyone I work with to do, excuse me, is to write. We again have these stories going on within us, but while they're still within our bodies, within our minds, they become corrupted. They become something that isn't real true. If you're like me and you're like everyone I've worked with, you've had amazing ideas in your head, but the moment you speak them out loud, you go, I don't even need you to say anything. That's a dumb idea. But in our head, it was genius. And what writing does is it allows us to actually see what's going on inside of our head, to put words, real words, tangible words that we can see and read. And then in doing so, the hope is at some point we actually look at that and we challenge the thought. What if? What if this belief is not right? What if? What am I seeing that is purely through my own eyes and not through another person's eyes? What am I doing that is based off of my own fears? So we write, we reflect, and it has to be on paper. Computer doesn't work, a phone does not work. And I don't care if you throw it away afterwards, rip it up, write it in Swahili, it makes no difference. The main thing is get it out of you. Get it out of you.
You know, it's interesting, Justin, again, as you explained that, I'm thinking of Psalm 42 and Psalm 43, where David, the author, basically does some self-talk. He is downcast. He keeps saying over and over, why am I depressed? And his solution as he begins the self-talk is, I'm going to put my hope in God. I'm going to put my trust in God. He looks for something bigger and stronger and more reliable than himself. So self-talk would be one. Something that I do, we've got time for maybe one or two more suggestions. I learned this in the military. You have a course of action 1, 2, and 3. You never, in a military plan, have one course of action. And I have found by having 2 or 3 options as I look at a problem, there is some hopefulness that comes just out of that particular exercise. So that's one thing that I use even to this day. Anybody else?
One of the things I've often shared with soldiers, if we are if we're astronauts headed to the moon and we're off by 1 degree, we're going to miss the moon by 3,000 miles. And so one of the things I often ask them is, where are you headed? Where do you want to be? You know, even the Bible says Jesus set his face like flint to go to Jerusalem. He didn't let anybody dissuade him from where he wanted to be. So where do you want to be? And it may not be where you're going to be 5 years from now, but what can we do today to move 1 degree in the right direction so that we're not 3,000 miles off base down the road?
Thanks, Lou. We've got time for one more suggestion on hopefulness and how to practice it. Mike Roberts, would you kind of speak to it, please?
Sure. I think first of all of you have done a fantastic job. I'm sure the audience feels that way, communicating. Certainly the internal game that each of us plays, managing hopefulness, managing the environment that we're in, and the spirit of various things that bring us down. One of the things that I believe that Justin hit on it very adroitly, and that is, if one can share your innermost feelings and thoughts and try to keep that with your partnerships and relationships, try to keep that holy by just sharing feelings, not trying to be right, not trying to be the know-it-all, have all the answers, flu pandemic, whatever the case may be. We're inundated with all of the media coloring our window. Sometimes the window is transparent, sometimes it's translucent, sometimes it's dark, and you have no idea what's on the other side. But if one can sit back and share feelings as opposed to thoughts, it doesn't get you in trouble much at all. That's the comment I have to make.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, I was thinking of one other thing. You hear often hope is not an option, and sometimes I'm offended by that, but I'll tell you what y'all have taught me today, panelists. It's not, I agree with that. Hope is not an option. Hope is a way of life.
Right.
It is a heart tug on how to live our life. Well, let me give you one piece of good news and something hopeful. Even though this is our last webinar, this is not the end state of what Warrior to Citizen does. In fact, if you go to the website, warriortocitizen.org, you can see a library of resources that are available, as well as upcoming events that are sponsored by Warrior to Citizen. So first of all, I would like to thank the panelists for this wonderful conversation today. I mean, I'm walking away from this one very hopeful just by having listened to the discussion. So thank you for taking the time to speak into my life and the lives of all of those who are listening today. And we also would like to thank the audience for being a part of this wonderful discussion. And we look forward to seeing you again at some point in the future when you interact with Warrior to Citizen. With that said, everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Bye-bye.